Great. Let's get started. So yesterday we went in very deep into one of the most central teachings that the Buddha gave, dependent origination, right? And in a way, it brings together a lot of the things that we've been talking about. The fact that a moment of experience that we have, that is consisting of the five aggregates, there is a certain way in which this comes about. We have a certain personality, a certain influence of all the impressions that we have experienced in life. We bring that baggage, we bring what we have physically, we bring that into every moment. Then we encounter the environment. Something happens, some information is received. The mind decides something, one of the other things is important because it has a certain quality to it, certain kind of feeling that it brings out in us. And based on the way we have interpreted things in the past, based on what we have known, we use all that information to make sense of the environment and to respond to it. And this is something that is happening all the time. So when we look at our practice itself, when we think about how our mind gets distracted, so the same thing happens. You enter a moment with a certain configuration of yourself. Some or the other information event happens, a thought comes up, something that you have to do, something that happened earlier in the day, something that is very important to you. Thought comes up, there is a contact. Your mind, that thought, and your ability to process mental information, they come together, there is a contact, and it seeks your mind's attention. If it gets your mind's attention at the right time, then you go along with it. You start thinking about what it means and what you have a habitual response to it. In your meditation practice, since there is not too much you're doing, typically you are performing mental actions. You think further about it. You start having more thoughts related to that, right? In normal life, you may have physical actions or verbal actions. So verbal actions can also happen in the mind when we have our inner narrator, inner chatter that is happening, right? We always have this inner dialogue, how we are talking about things, we're making sense of things, we are wondering what to do, what might happen. So all those things constitute verbal actions. And those actions can also set off another chain of dependent origination. So that's what's happening. In our practice, when we train our mindfulness, we start to see this earlier and earlier. Typically, what happens when we begin the practice, we start seeing things at the point of verbal action. As we start going deeper and deeper, we start seeing where the story building is about to happen, clinging and craving start to take place. And this we get to understand based on the tension and tightness that is developing in our mind. The first thing that we learn to do is when our mind is engaged in a story, how instead of fighting with it and introducing more noise into our mind, what we do is we start working with the basis for that storytelling, which is the craving. So through our understanding of dependent origination, we can see that when craving is not there, the rest of the storytelling, the rest of the habitual action ceases to be. So when we use the 6 R's, we recognize, release, let it be, don't fight with it, don't introduce more noise, relax the tightness in our mind, smile and come back. We are simply saying that at this moment, I don't need to take any action on this thought process. And we do that by depersonalizing. When we let go of the craving, it no longer becomes about I want it, I don't want it, I like it, I don't like it. The mind simply says, this came up, this doesn't deserve my attention or my action at this point. Let me go to what I have actually decided to do. And over time, as we keep repeating this, mindfulness starts to become aware of craving building up. Not only the actions, not only the clinging but also the craving. So mind becomes very sensitive to that tension and tightness building up in our mind. It means we are on a storytelling drive now. And what happens is, typically with that storytelling drive, we end up becoming very desperate. We divide the world into everything in the world, all possible actions, into favorable for us, unfavorable for us, even if they may not be. Then we do this in a very short term kind of way of thinking, right? So in the short term, we are very good at predicting what is going to happen in the world and doing what is useful. So stepping out of the way of a car, or taking food when you're hungry, those are things that we are able to do well. But when it comes to the long term, we are not able to take consistent actions that will result in wholesome outcomes for us over the long term. Otherwise, we would be continuously be very happy, right? So if you think about it, humans are a intelligent being, and they understand happiness is important. And if we were good at long term planning, then we would always be doing things that are leading to more and more happiness. We would be happier and happier and happier as we progress in life. But we have evidence that that is not the case. We may be happy, but it's not like we have a continuous movement towards happiness. That's because our mind is good at solving short term problems, right? And that is why it is important to understand craving, because when we start thinking about long term things and we start planning and we start worrying ourselves, start getting distressed about it, we are actually oversimplifying reality and assuming what things are going to be and creating our own distress. And as the craving goes down, this is what happens, right? So the contacts also, as we start going deeper, start getting collected, start getting going into the jhanas, the number of contact events also start going down. The mind's propensity to follow after the craving goes down, because we've not been after the feeling with craving goes down, because we've not been sustaining our attention with craving on anything during this time. So the mind starts to get collected as well. So today we're going to take this a little further before we start bringing it all together. How does all of this help us, tie in and actually make sense of life, make actual changes into our life that results in happier experiences for us in the future. So we'll start that process of tying up tomorrow and day after, over the next 2-3 days of the retreat. Today what we'll do is we will go a little deeper. So like dependent origination, there is another very central teaching of the Buddha. This is known as the three characteristics of existence, right? And we'll talk about this. So the first characteristic of existence, these are known as the Trilakshan or Tilakhan, right? So three characteristics or symptoms of reality. So the first of this is called impermanence or anicca. In Sanskrit or Hindi, that would be anityata, things not being eternal, permanent, or unchanged over time. This is quite evident to us. We can see it everywhere around us. Like trees grow from a seed to a massive tree, they grow old and then they will no longer cease to exist. Everything that I'm using right now, this computer will be unusable at some point. If we look at ourselves, we are also continuously changing. 10 years back, 20 years back, 25 years back, we would be very different organisms, even physically, different size, different shape, different consciousness, different form, right? So if you look at the aggregates, all of them would be different conditioning. Your favorite music when you were 5 years old is not your favorite music now. Your favorite actor when you were 15 years old is not your favorite actor now, right? So all those preferences, your way of understanding things, maybe you learned a new language, maybe you learned new concepts, maybe you learned new skills along the way. Your ability to understand things has changed. Your concepts have changed. The concepts that you've had about, say, justice or fairness, for example, keeps changing. Your concepts that you have about generosity or survival, all these things keep changing. Your idea of happiness, your idea of satisfaction, all these things keep changing. So we can see it in our own lives that things are constantly in flux, right? So they are always changing. And related to this, the Buddha says what we need to understand is our sense of self is also changing. So what we experience at any point of time is a sense of self. So if let me take an example, okay, and let me talk about it in terms of the aggregates as well as dependent origination, right? So let us assume that I went to say a bakery shop and I smelled something that I absolutely enjoy eating. Okay, some maybe say a cheesecake, like nice, very rich smell and very heavy and unhealthy thing to eat. But I smelt it, and now what happens? That contact happened. So the smell came, my nose and my nose consciousness came together, and there was a feeling, very pleasant feeling. My mind said, this is a great opportunity. Let's take advantage of this opportunity. And I started saying, I want it. I like it. I started making plans to eat it. Okay. So now I say, I want it. And just then I remember taking my weight in the morning and seeing maybe it's gone up. Or I remember not fitting into some favorite pant of mine. Right. So, and that that mental that memory comes up, right? A mental mind object comes up, and a mental contact happens. Mental consciousness starts operating, and a painful feeling comes up, and my mind says, I don't want this. In the same instant, I have extremely opposing facets of myself. Let's take another example. Okay, so suppose a person comes home from work. They've had an excellent day at work. They've been, you know, appreciated by everyone, and they come home, and their child comes and plays some kind of a prank on them, and the reaction is, wow, my child is so playful and energetic, joyful, and the child gets lifted up and gets a kiss or something, right? And another day the person has a terrible day at office, some problem with the manager, layoffs are looming in the company, whatever is happening, right? And the same person comes around, the same child comes, does the same prank, and this time gets thrashed or scolded for it, right? What happened? So who is this person? Is it the are you the first person, are you the second person, are you the person who wants the cheesecake, are you the person who doesn't want the cheesecake, right? So what we need to understand is the sense of self that we actually experience at any point of time is in response to the situation at that particular point of time. It is in response to the contact that has taken place, it is in response to the feeling and the clinging, right? So the story that is being built, so every feeling that you have about certain thing has a, and every concept that you have in your mind, every sangya, every feeling, it has a certain persona or certain way of looking at it associated with it, right? So the painful feeling of remembering that maybe I'm gaining weight, that is associated with a sense of self that doesn't want to gain weight, or the pleasant feeling of someone who wants to eat that cheesecake is associated with that person who absolutely enjoys it is associated with those memories of absolutely enjoying, having great experiences eating that cheesecake. So at any point of time we are developing the sense of self, and the Buddha says that just understand this sense of self is something that is coming up in that moment. It is not a permanent sense of self. What you think is fair today, you may not think 5 years from now, right? So even that is changing. So as time changes, not only at any given point of time do different contacts, different events bring up different aspects of your personality, but you may have completely different. So for example, people's political leanings may change, people's ideologies may change. Somebody goes from an employee to an employer, their concept of justice or fairness may change. So these kind of things happen. Somebody who claims to be extremely environment friendly may be still booking a cab and traveling on it alone, right? They may buy recyclable garbage bags, but they may be traveling alone in a right? So though we have a lot of inconsistencies, so we do, there is, so what the Buddha says, there is not this one permanent eternal self that is acting in all that you are experiencing. He refuses to comment on whether or not it exists, simply says that whatever you are experiencing in that moment is something that it's literally like that animal that is capable of reacting to a banana or to a lion, right? Should I run? Should I run away from this opportunity? Should I go towards that opportunity? The Buddha doesn't say this, but he says that the sense of self is related to the present situation only. It is not, it is coming up. The person who liked the cheesecake came up at that moment. So at that point of time, if, for example, I had a bad cold, I couldn't smell the cheesecake, I may not have even thought about it. I may have just gone on and done whatever I had to do, right? So that person, that sense of self that came up because of that contact, the environment or the events that are happening, that is bringing it up. So at any point of time, so somebody, when we take that example of the traffic, right? So that horn actually brought up that person who feels, that this is not the way to drive, or this, I'm not going to take this insult, right? So literally you were doing something else, you were driving, maybe listening to music, maybe thinking about something else, and this contact, this event actually brought up that sense of self, that person, part of your personality, right? So it's important to understand, whatever, at any point of time, if we start thinking, I like it, I don't like it, I want it, and get stuck to that outcome, right? So in an argument, for instance, get stuck to, I have to win this argument. So you are actually getting stuck to something that doesn't have any permanent nature. It is just come up in the moment, but still you give it the entire might of your service, everything in your energy, in your capacity, you pour into the service of that sense of self that is temporary. So the Buddha explains, this is one way the Buddha explains that non-self, and the third characteristic, right? So we have impermanence, things are in flux, always, anything that is information, anything that is physical, anything that is mental, everything is impermanent, it is in flux, and none of it is actually, any time that you feel a sense of self, it is not a permanent self. Even the thought that you have, right, when you have a certain contact happening, you are not making it happen, it is coming up because conditions are right for it, right? And the third thing the Buddha says, the third characteristic is, when we don't understand these two things, when we don't understand these two truths, we inevitably have suffering, right? So, for example, we don't understand the impermanence of a situation. We don't understand how the mind works. We take it personally. We want a certain outcome. We work towards that outcome. Okay. So I want this. So I have a thought. A thought comes up that I must have this car so that it will make me feel good. It will bolster my status, and it will, I can, more family members can come into this car. So I have to buy this car. So I go ahead and I keep working towards that. I anticipate that once I have this, things are going to be good forever. So we assume a certain permanence to that situation. We buy that car, and that feeling lasts for exactly 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, starts diminishing, right? So that feeling that you felt that, once I get this, I'll be happy. And it's not just a car, it may be, once I get married to this person, once I get this promotion, once I get this job, once I achieve financial independence, I will be happy, right? So that there is that always goal orientation. This is simply the same mechanism that is helping us to get a banana or helping us to run away from a lion. It's nothing more than that. But we think that once something happens, we'll get permanent happiness, and we get very personally attached to that outcome. But as soon as we get it, the way, because things are impermanent, either, so one of two things can happen: either you don't get that outcome, or you get that outcome. If you don't get that outcome, you get morose. If you do get that outcome, your feeling about it starts to change over a period of time. The other thing that might happen is you might start getting feelings of possessiveness, feelings of fear of losing that thing. That, what if this thing goes away from me? What if this thing stops looking as new as it is, right? So we are always grasping onto things, clutching onto things, taking it personally. And when we do that, when we take things personally, when we treat it as self, this is mine, and when we think of that as a with a sense of permanence, then we are setting us up for constant disappointment. Instead of doing what is needed in the moment, what is most appropriate in the moment, or it's great, work towards getting that vehicle, get it, and because it serves a purpose, not because it is going to solve your need for happiness. So because we make these false assumptions that as soon as I do this, I'm going to be happy. Like I said, if we were really wired to be extremely good at long term planning, then our happiness curve would have been like this, right? And typically the world happiness survey says that the happiness curve is like this. So people are happy when they're children because they're still like discovering a lot of things, and then over time they get fairly unhappy, and at some point of time when they start understanding that, you know, I'm really not good at planning long term happiness, so let me just enjoy the moment, it starts to go up a little bit more. So these are the three characteristics: impermanence, impersonality or non-self, and suffering, that the Buddha teaches. That if we don't understand impermanence and non-self, if we take things personally, and if we think this is the permanent me, this is mine forever, I depend on this for my happiness, I depend on this outcome for my happiness, and I will work towards it, and that outcome will be permanent. So that will never happen. Anytime you have thought in your life, once this happens, I'll be fine, that doesn't happen, because something else somewhere else will change by that time. By the time you get there, your own mind will change, your own relationship with that thing will change, right? So by the time you can afford a big SUV, your mind will say, you know, maybe I deserve like a luxury car instead, right? So that is a continuously changing goalpost. There are many other ways to explain this also, but today I just wanted to give a sense of these three characteristics. Okay. With that background, now I'm going to do another. So earlier in the retreat, we read a sutta. So I'm going to read another sutta this time. And I won't take a break in the middle. We'll just do the sutta, take a pause, wait for some questions, and do the prayer for today. And this is a very powerful sutta. This is called the Chachak Sutta, or the six sets of six. This is the 148th discourse in the Majjhima Nikaya of the middle length discourses of the Buddha. And this talks about this particular way of explaining impermanence, impersonality, right? So the Buddha says that everything that you're experiencing right now, it just happened because there was a contact, and, you know, certain activities got activated by that. You have a sense of self related to that. You have a relation with that object. You have a relation with different, you know, body parts, your understanding, your concept, everything that has come up because of that little event. It's activated because of that. Stop getting so attached to it. Stop getting so, you know, like if somebody's if honked the horn at me, that is not the end of things. That is not, you're not permanently tainted and insulted by that horn. It just happened in that moment. The sense of self that is agitated is just came up in that moment. Don't get too attached to it. Don't think of it as something permanent. Okay, I'll just wet my throat because I'll be speaking for a while. And we'll start the sutta. So I just want to remind everyone, like I mentioned, the suttas are part of the oral tradition, right? So today I don't want you to really look at my face as much. Not that I want you to on other days, but focus a lot more. Today there'll be no slides. Just try to let that in through your ears, right? Try to just let it in. It will be long, it will be repetitive. You may miss some parts of it, but whatever goes in, it will find a place, it will make a difference. So you have to trust me a little bit on that, because I've delivered this discourse multiple times. So I'm going to start with this. So pay attention, let it, give ear is the way it is translated in the suttas. Okay, give ear to this. We're talking about the six sense bases. The sutta itself doesn't have all the sense bases completely laid out sometimes. So I will be using some of those shortenings because it's a fairly long sutta. But you will get the sense of what we are talking about. Chachak Sutra, the 6 sets of 6. Translation by Bhikkhu Bodhi. Thus have I heard. On one occasion, the Blessed One was living at Shravasti in Jeta's Grove, Anathapindik's park. There he addressed the bhikkhus thus. Bhikkhus, Venerable Sir, they replied. The Blessed One said this. Bhikkhus, I shall teach you the Dhamma that is good in the beginning, good in the middle, and good in the end. With the right meaning and phrasing, I shall reveal a life that is utterly perfect and pure. This teaching is the 6 sets of 6. Listen and attend closely to what I shall say. Yes, Venerable Sir, the bhikkhus replied. The Blessed One said this. The 6 internal bases should be understood. The 6 external bases should be understood. The 6 classes of consciousness should be understood. The 6 classes of contact should be understood. The 6 classes of feeling should be understood. The 6 classes of craving should be understood. The 6 internal bases should be understood. So it was said. And with reference to what was this said? These are the eye base, the ear base, the nose base, the tongue base, the body base, and the mind base. So it was with reference to this that it was said. The 6 internal bases should be understood. This is the first set of 6. The 6 external bases should be understood. So it was said. And with reference to what was this said? There are the visual form base, the sound base, the odor base, the flavor base, the tangible base, and the mind object base. So it was with reference to this that it was said. The 6 external bases should be understood. This is the second set of 6. The 6 classes of consciousness should be understood. So it was said. And with reference to what was this said? Dependent on the eye and forms, eye consciousness arises. Dependent on the ear and sounds, ear consciousness arises. Dependent on the nose and odors, nose consciousness arises. Dependent on the tongue and flavors, tongue consciousness arises. Dependent on the body and tangibles, body consciousness arises. Depending on the mind and mind object, mind consciousness arises. So it was with reference to this that it was said. The 6 classes of consciousness should be understood. This is the third set of 6. The 6 classes of contact should be understood. So it was said. And with reference to what was this said? Dependent on the eye and forms, eye consciousness arises. The meeting of the 3 is contact. Depending on the ear and sounds, ear consciousness arises. The meeting of the 3 is contact. Dependent on the nose and odors, nose consciousness arises. The meeting of the 3 is contact. Dependent on the tongue and flavors, tongue consciousness arises. The meeting of the 3 is contact. Dependent on the body and tangibles, body consciousness arises. The meeting of the 3 is contact. Dependent on the mind and mind objects, mind consciousness arises. The meeting of the 3 is contact. So it was with reference to this that it was said, the 6 classes of contact should be understood. This is the fourth set of 6. The 6 classes of feeling should be understood. So it was said. And with reference to what was this said? Dependent on the I and form, I consciousness arises. The meeting of the three is contact. With contact as condition, there is feeling. Dependent on the ear and sounds, ear consciousness arises. The meeting of the three is contact. With contact as condition, there is feeling. Dependent on the nose and odors, nose consciousness arises. The meeting of the three is contact. With contact as condition, there is feeling. Dependent on the tongue and flavors, tongue consciousness arises. The meeting of the three is contact. With contact as condition, there is feeling. Dependent on the body and tangibles, body consciousness arises. The meeting of the three is contact. With contact as condition, there is feeling. Dependent on the mind and mind objects, mind consciousness arises. The meeting of the three is contact. With contact as condition, there is feeling. So it was with reference to this that it was said, the 6 classes of feeling should be understood. This is the 5th set of 6. The 6 classes of craving should be understood. So it was said. And with reference to what was this said? Dependent on the I and forms, I consciousness arises. The meeting of the three is contact. With contact as condition, there is feeling. With feeling as condition, there is craving. Dependent on the ear and sounds, ear consciousness arises. With feeling as condition, there is craving. Dependent on the nose and odors, nose consciousness arises. The meeting of the three is contact. With contact as feeling, condition, feeling comes to be. With feeling as condition, there is craving. Dependent on the tongue and flavors, tongue consciousness arises. With contact as condition, there is feeling. With feeling as condition, there is craving. Dependent on the body and tangibles, body consciousness arises. The meeting of the three is contact. With contact as condition, there is feeling. With feeling as condition, there is craving. Dependent on the mind and mind objects, mind consciousness arises. The meeting of the three is contact. With contact as condition, there is feeling. With feeling as condition, there is craving. So it was with reference to this that it was said. The 6 classes of craving should be understood. This is the 6th set of 6. Now we talk about not self or impersonality. If anyone says the I is self, that is not tenable. The rise and fall of the I are discerned. And since its rise and fall are discerned, it would follow myself rises and falls. That is why it is not tenable for anyone to say the I is self. Thus, the I is not self. If anyone says forms are self, that is not tenable. The rise and fall of visual forms are discerned. Since its rise and fall are discerned, it would follow myself rises and falls. That is why it is not tenable for anyone to say forms are self. Thus, the I is not self, forms are not self. If anyone says I consciousness is self, that is not tenable. The rise and fall of I consciousness are discerned. Since its rise and fall are discerned, it would follow myself rises and falls. That is why it is not tenable for anyone to say I consciousness is self. Thus, I is not self, forms are not self, I consciousness is not self. If anyone says I contact is self, that is not tenable. Thus, the I is not self, forms are not self, I conscious is not self, I contact is not self. If anyone says feeling is self, that is not tenable. Thus, the I is not self, Forms are not self. I conscious is not self. Eye contact is not self. Feeling is not self. If anyone says craving is self, that is not tenable. Thus, the I is not self. Forms are not self. Eye consciousness is not self. Eye contact is not self. Feeling is not self. Craving is not self. If anyone says the air is self, that is not tenable. Rise and fall of the air are discerned. Since its rise and fall are discerned, it would follow myself rises and falls. That is why it is not tenable for anyone to say the ear is self. Thus, the ear is not self. If anyone says sounds are self, ear consciousness is self, ear contact is self, feeling is self, craving is self, that is not tenable because it is possible to discern the rise and fall of all of these. That is why it is not tenable for anyone to say sounds are self, ear consciousness is self, ear contact is self, feeling is self, craving is self. Thus, the ear is not self, sounds are not self, ear consciousness is not self, ear contact is not self, feeling is not self, craving is not self. If anyone says the nose is self, that is not tenable. The rise and fall of the nose are discerned. Since its rise and fall are discerned, it would follow myself rises and falls. That is why it is not tenable for anyone to say the nose is self. Thus, the nose is not self. If anyone says odors are self, nose consciousness is self, nose contact is self, feeling is self, craving is self, that is not tenable. The rise and fall of these are discerned, and since their rise and fall are discerned, it would follow myself rises and falls. That is why it is not tenable for anyone to say odors are self, nose consciousness is self, nose contact is self, feeling is self, craving is self. Thus, the nose is not self, odors are not self, nose consciousness is not self, nose contact is not self, feeling is not self, craving is not self. Similarly, it is not tenable for anyone to say the tongue is self. Thus, the tongue is not self, flavors are not self, tongue consciousness is not self, tongue contact is not self, feeling is not self, craving is not self. Similarly, if anyone says the body is self, that is not tenable. Thus, the body is not self, tangibles are not self, body consciousness is not self, body contact is not self, feeling is not self, craving is not self. If anyone says the mind is self, that is not tenable. The rise and fall of the mind are discerned, and since its rise and fall are discerned, it would follow myself rises and falls. That is why it is not tenable for anyone to say the mind is self. Thus, the mind is not self. Similarly, mind is not self, mind objects are not self, mind consciousness is not self, mind contact is not self, feeling is not self, craving is not self. The origination of identity. Now, bhikkhus, this is the way leading to the origination of identity view, thinking that this is the permanent self that exists. One regards the I thus: this is mine, this I am, this is myself. One regards visual forms thus: this is mine, this I am, this is myself. One regards eye consciousness thus: this is mine, this I am, this is myself. One regards eye contact thus: this is mine, this I am, this is myself. One regards feeling thus: this is mine, this I am, this is myself. One regards craving thus: this is mine, this I am, this is myself. One regards the ear thus: this is mine, this I am, this is myself. One regards the nose thus: This is mine, this I am, this is myself. One regards the tongue thus. This is mine, this I am, this is myself. One regards the body thus. This is mine, this I am, this is myself. One regards the mind thus. This is mine, this I am, this is myself. One regards mind objects thus. This is mine, this I am, this is myself. One regards mind consciousness thus. This is mine, this I am, this is myself. One regards mind contact thus. This is mine, this I am, this is myself. One regards feelings thus. This is mine, this I am, this is myself. One regards craving thus. This is mine, this I am, this is myself. This is the way leading to the origination of identity or taking things personally or permanently. Now, because this is the way leading to the cessation of taking things personally, of a permanent, attaching it to a permanent identity. One regards the I thus. This is not mine. This I am not. This is not myself. One regards forms thus. This is not mine. This I am not. This is not myself. One regards I consciousness done. This is not mine. This I am not. This is not myself. One regards eye contact thus. This is not mine. This I am not. This is not myself. One regards feeling thus. This is not mine. This I am not. This is not myself. One regards craving thus. This is not mine. This I am not. This is not myself. One regards the ear thus. This is not mine. This I am not. This is not myself. One regards the nose thus. This is not mine. This I am not. This is not myself. One regards the tongue thus. This is not mine. This I am not. This is not myself. One regards the body thus. This is not mine. This I am not. This is not myself. One regards the mind thus. This is not mine. This I am not. This is not myself. One regards mind objects thus. This is not mine. This I am not. This is not myself. One regards mind consciousness thus. This is not mine. This I am not. This is not myself. One regards mind contact thus. This is not mine. This I am not. This is not myself. One regards mind feeling thus. This is not mine. This I am not. This is not myself. One regards craving thus. This is not mine. This I am not. This is not myself. The underlying tendencies. Because depending on the I and forms, I consciousness arises. The meeting of the three is contact. With contact as condition, there arises a feeling, felt as pleasant or painful, or neither painful nor pleasant. When one is touched by a pleasant feeling, if one delights in it, welcomes it, remains holding on to it, then the underlying tendency to greed, to lust lies within one. When one is touched by a painful feeling, if one sorrows, grieves, and laments, weeps, beating one's breast, and becomes distraught, then the underlying tendency to aversion lies within one. When one is touched by a neither pleasant nor painful feeling, if one does not understand as it actually is, that feeling, the underlying tendency to ignorance lies within one. Because that one shall here and now make an end of suffering without abandoning the underlying tendency to lust for pleasant feeling, without abolishing the underlying tendency to aversion towards painful feeling, without removing the underlying tendency to ignorance with regards to neutral feelings, without abandoning ignorance and arousing true knowledge, making an end of suffering is impossible. Because dependent on the ear and sounds, ear consciousness arises. Dependent on the mind and mind objects, mind consciousness arises. That one should The meeting of the three is contact. With contact as condition, there arises a feeling felt as pleasant or painful, or neither painful nor pleasant. That one should here and now make an end of suffering without abandoning the underlying tendency to lust for pleasant feeling, aversion for painful feeling, and ignorance with respect to neutral feelings. This is impossible. Abandonment of the underlying tendencies. Because dependent on the I and forms, I consciousness arises. The meeting of the three is contact. With contact as condition, there arises a feeling felt as pleasant or painful or neutral. When one is touched by a pleasant feeling, one does not remain holding on to it does not remain attached to it. Then the underlying tendency to lust does not lie within one. When one is touched by a painful feeling, if one does not sorrow, grieve, and lament, does not weep, beating one's breast and become distraught, then the underlying tendency to aversion does not lie within one. When one is touched by a neutral feeling, one understands it as it actually is. Then the underlying tendency to ignorance does not lie within one. Bhikkhus, that one shall here and now make an end of suffering by abandoning the underlying tendency to lust for pleasant feeling, abolishing the underlying tendency to aversion towards painful feeling, and removing the underlying tendency to ignorance towards neutral feelings. This is possible. Bhikkhus, dependent on the ear and sounds, ear consciousness arises. Dependent on the mind and mind objects, mind consciousness arises. Meeting of the three is contact. With contact as condition, there arises a feeling felt as pleasant or painful or neutral. That one shall make here and now an end of suffering by abandoning the underlying tendency to lust for pleasant feeling, aversion for painful feeling, and ignorance towards neutral feelings. This is possible. Liberation. Seeing thus, because a well taught disciple becomes disenchanted with the eye, forms eye consciousness, eye contact, feeling, and craving. He becomes disenchanted with the ear, the nose, the tongue, the body, and the mind. Disenchanted with craving. Being disenchanted, his mind becomes liberated. When it is liberated, there comes a knowledge, it is liberated. He understands birth is destroyed, the holy life has been lived, what had to be done has been done, there is no more coming to any state of being. That is what the Blessed One said. The bhikkhus were satisfied and delighted in the Blessed One's words. Now, while this discourse was being spoken, through not clinging, the minds of 60 bhikkhus were liberated from the taints. I'll just take a moment. So, what is the Buddha saying here? It says, any moment, any event happens, we become that. A thought comes up, we become that thought. Anger comes up, we become anger. Fear comes up, we become fear. Greed comes up, we become greed. These mechanisms are great to pluck a banana from a tree, to run away from a predator, to get out of the way of a bus. But all the time, we continuously keep becoming the thought. We take a craving, a painful feeling. Why am I feeling like this? I don't like it. I don't like it. Mind keeps being stuck with that. The Buddha often gives the example of a arrow. When an arrow strikes you, there is one physical pain of the arrow, and then there is that mental pain. Who shot this arrow? Why did they shoot it? What what is this arrow made of? What was the intention of the person? Without removing the arrow, we keep suffering the story of the arrow. The physical pain, the actual hurt is very temporary, very small. We can let go of it, but we hang on to it. We make it ours. We make it about us. We become that hurt or that fear, that anger, that lust. And the Buddha is just saying, look at it, look at how that sense of self comes. Something in the environment happens, some information is processed. And to process that information, you assume a certain identity. That's what it's becoming. If you don't become overcome with greed for something, if you don't become overcome with aversion for something, if you don't become overcome with ignorance, what the Buddha means with ignorance here is taking the thing personally, becoming that thing. So even for something neutral, it doesn't need to be painful, doesn't need to be very pleasant. We can still identify with it. And when we identify, we give the keys of our happiness to whatever happens in the external circumstances. I am happy because things are a certain way. I am happy because of the contacts that are happening due to the external environment. Our happiness becomes predicated on something that is impermanent, always in flux. So, not understanding that, not being attached to what is happening outside, not becoming identifying with that, helps us to have a joyful mind that is capable of taking wholesome actions and not just reactions to whatever is happening. And that's what the Buddha talked about, and listening to him, and it's said in the sutta that 60 people just got liberated because they understood that clinging to whatever is happening in the environment, anything that is coming up, becoming that, completely allowing our mind to be hijacked by that is not the way to be. Anyway, so if you can, I would highly recommend doing a sit after this sutta. This is a powerful factor of the oral tradition. There'll be the words that have been spoken will be registering in some part of your mind. So now if you go and sit, you will find that different insights can pop up in your meditation. I'll just take a pause for any questions and then we'll share a minute.
Very inspiring. Thank you very much.
If there are no other questions, then let's share merit. May suffering once be suffering free, and the fear struck fearless be. May the grieving shed all grief, and may all beings find relief. May all beings share this merit that we have thus acquired for the acquisition of all kinds of happiness. May enlightened beings of mighty power share in this merit of ours. May they long protect the Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu.